I'm really glad to see communication with parents about what's going to happen in the fall.
We don't know exactly what to expect.
The bottom line is that our kids have sacrificed so much this year, and the learning loss is immense. The social emotional loss is immense.
Kids, class, and coronavirus, the return to school, a Coin 6 town hall.
And welcome to our town hall, Kids, Class, and Coronavirus, the return to school. I'm Jeff Gianola.
And I'm Elizabeth Din. For the next hour, we will be answering questions submitted by you, parents, students, and teachers about the upcoming school year. And tonight, we are joined by our live panel of school superintendents from our area right here, and they're here to address your concerns.
Our guests include Guadalupe Guerrero from Portland Public Schools, Christy Perry of Salem-Kaiser, Dr. Sue Rieke-Smith of Tigard-Tualatin, Mike Merlino from Evergreen Public Schools, and Dr. Jeff Snell of Vancouver Public Schools. A big thank you to all our superintendents for joining us tonight.
And so now let's get to it. We did receive dozens of questions for each of you tonight. I'm sure none of you, though, will be surprised to hear most of those were about mask wearing. That's not up for debate, though. The governors of both Oregon and Washington have mandated mask wearing. That's regardless of vaccination status as school begins this year.
Yeah, but at a recent meeting, Superintendent Perry, you expressed something that may have been forgotten during the pandemic, a need for kindness. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so we've hosted 2 community engagement sessions in the past 10 days. And I just decided to address the issues around and the questions around mask head on. And I'm asking and calling on our community and our parents to teach our children kindness, to teach them that we have kids and staff in our schools that have immune compromised systems, that our sacrifice of a mask is the health and safety of others. And so I asked us to switch the narrative for our kids and to teach our kids and all of us that we show up with love and kindness.
Well, thank you for that. And I want to follow up with that. And I'll start with Superintendent Guerrero with this question. How do you enforce this mask requirement once kids are back in class?
Well, the good thing is, I think certainly in our community, there's broad support for doing everything we can to accomplish a couple of things. Of course, ensure the health and safety of not just our nearly 50,000 students, but our almost 9,000 employees as well. And I think, and the second important objective is to minimize learning, disruption to learning. And so I think the broader community has been very supportive of adopting all of the layered mitigation strategies that we can implement. And we know next to vaccines that masks are an important one. And so we're continuing with our campaign of educating our families. And I think our students, when they came back in the spring, understood that that was a new routine. So we don't anticipate any issues there, with the minor exception of students who, for whatever reason, may have a different kind of issue, maybe some of our special needs students who wouldn't be able to comply.
Let's bring in some of our other superintendents. And Mike Merlino, we'll start with you. Why don't you weigh in on this? How do you enforce something like the mask mandate?
I mean, I think I agree with Guadalupe. Our experience over the last year has been that kids they've worked well with the masks. And so we do have the word out. In our state, it's mandated, as you mentioned earlier. It's not a new expectations. I mean, I think you do hear some pushback from folks, but I think we're just taking it on as it's just an extension of what we did this past spring. Kids are continue to be expected. Staff are continue to be expected. It's for everyone's safety, and we just don't anticipate the issue, and we're looking forward to bringing our kids back, actually.
All right, and now to Dr. Rieke-Smith. Do you anticipate this being an issue, and how do you talk about enforcement? Because you look at young kids all the way up to high school. I mean, yes, masks aren't new, but how do you, once again, enforce this every once in a while when it happens and maybe somebody is being difficult about this issue with masks?
Well, I want to echo what my colleagues have to say. Our kids have been absolute bricks about this. They are so excited just to be back. I was sharing before we came on air. During our summer school, over 1,200 kids who experienced academic enrichment programming for 4 weeks with masks on and with ample breaks. And not one of those students said, I'm not coming back. They want to engage. They want to be a part of being with their friends and having that academic enriching environment. For the parents who have raised that concern, we work to the best of our ability to provide them with information. I believe that that is always going to be our opportunity and role as educators, is to educate and to help them to see the larger frame beyond their child. They certainly can make the decision for their child up to a point, but when you are in a congregate setting that is required by state law, it changes the playing field. And so we continue to educate and we continue to set ground rules about how we want to keep our children safe and in place so that they can learn and they can recover the lost learning from last year. And again, to Superintendent Perry's comment about the kindness. This is what community does. We take care of our children. We take care of each other. We teach our children how to do the heavy lifting and take care of the hard things that we have to learn in life. But at the same time, to also help them see how successful they're being and help them really understand this is just part of life as it is now, but the greater reward is I get to be with friends, I get to do great things with my teacher, I get to play sports, and we have come so far in the last year. It would be a shame not to be able to welcome every child, and I'm hopeful that every parent will do us the honor of bringing their child to us this year.
Okay, let's get Dr. Snell to weigh in on this. Do you anticipate that being a problem enforcing masks in your school district?
I would echo my colleagues that, there are always situations that we work through individually, whether it's masks or anything else, to try to meet our students and families' needs. And so there will be situations that we'll have to understand. I agree, common information, talking through, understanding the concerns and why that's an issue. But we had similar experiences in Vancouver, lots of great opportunities when we came back to school last year, summer as well. Kids really happy to be here, our sports teams really happy to be with each other. I just think of where we were at last year at this time, and we were talking about only remote learning options, and we've come a long way. Have we come all the way yet? No, and we would certainly rather be starting in different circumstances, but we're just really excited to get kids back. And even if we're masked, we can still let them know how much we love them and how excited we are to welcome them.
Right. So many of us wish that this pandemic was over by now, but of course it is not. All right. We want to let you know how we also went to a local park to see how parents are feeling about school. And you know what? Vaccinations are also a hot topic.
I'm just wondering if any point that the school districts will require people to be vaccinated to attend school.
Requiring vaccinations, both for students and staff. Let's start with Portland's Superintendent, Mr. Guerrero.
Well, once again, vaccines are a primary mitigation strategy. I'm so thankful that the vast majority of our educators have been vaccinated, and in cooperation with local partners and health clinics and other public health agencies, we've been able to be rather successful in early on moving our teachers and adults who work with our students, especially as we came back this spring, that they had access to that opportunity. And thank goodness, most of them have taken us up on that offer. So I'm not sure if it's as contentious an issue as it might be in other communities. But I do want to mention that we are in active conversations around sort of making the point that it is important for the broader community to understand that we have a shared interest and almost coalition. And I think we're having these conversations now actively around making sure we signal to the community that we're going to do everything we can to keep the learning environment healthy and safe. And so I think folks should stay tuned to where Portland Public Schools go with this. And then as far as vaccines for students, certainly for the 12 and up who have had the opportunity. Similarly, we've hosted health clinics in partnership with local public health providers. And so we've done a rather impressive job of making sure our high school students have that opportunity, and we are continuing to do that. Now, of course, we're all waiting on the edge of our seats for the green light for younger students. That'll be another important game changer and mitigation strategy to get our age 5 and up students also that opportunity, and we'll be ready to also deploy those opportunities. So definitely vaccines is a critically important strategy for us, and we're going to expect to continue that rate of vaccine uptake to be rather high here in Portland.
Well, let's continue with Superintendent Perry. Will you be requiring your staff to be vaccinated? Are you having discussions about this?
We're in the exact same place as Portland Public, with a really high percentage of our staff that's already vaccinated. And of course, we're always in ongoing conversation with our labor partners. But our bigger concern, I think, in the Salem area is around vaccination rates for kids. And so we've been doing the same thing, which is multiple clinics, lots of mobile sites with our Salem Health partners. But our vaccination rate, even for the kids eligible for the vaccination, is low. And so that's our big worry about wanting to be sure that our families have knowledge that vaccinations are the most important step families can take, and then are getting kids vaccinated. So we're continuing to have those conversations, just like Portland Public is.
And Dr. Ricky Smith, what about your district, Tigard-Tualatin?
And relative to our staff, we are in collaborative conversations with our associations, both around continuing to urge the small percentage that is not yet vaccinated, and having conversations around offering weekly tests to make sure that they themselves are safe and well. Relative to our children, same as my partners here, we also did canvassing of our neighborhoods and stood up clinics within our schools last spring. We continue to work in partnership in Washington County with our local neighbors, and have provided drive-through clinics at our high schools, and will continue to do so. We offer the same services through our student-based health centers. The bottom line is that vaccination is the gold standard. And I say that not just as a superintendent, having been immersed now in all of this work, but also in my former career where I was a trauma, critical care, and public health nurse. I know that vaccination is number one. I know that masking is number two. That is how the science works. And so if you do those things, when you have the opportunity to do them, you are able to keep people safe and well. Will they get sick? Yes, you will always have your breakthroughs. No vaccine is 100%. But the fact of the matter is you stay out of the hospital and the mortality rate is low. And what is particularly concerning for me at this point in time are the number of pediatric cases that we have not seen in last fall, where parents have relied on last fall's data to say, well, children don't get sick. We know that that's not true now. And it is sobering to see the numbers that are hospitalized, and far more sobering to see the numbers that are landing in ICU on ventilation. And so we just want to do everything we possibly can to protect our most precious resource, which is our children.
Right, and just as as Superintendent Guerrero had said, remember, 12 and under can't get the vaccine just yet. Now we want to touch on Vancouver Public Schools. Dr. Snell, what are your thoughts on possibly requiring your staff to be vaccinated?
Well, Governor Inslee came out with an announcement about all state employees. K-12 was not under that umbrella, although they're certainly paying attention to that. And so that'll be a decision that comes down from our state, and then we'll work to comply with that. Similar to our colleagues, great opportunities this spring. Staff took advantage of those opportunities, really trying to make sure that our communities have access to information and to services has been really important as well. And so we're kind of waiting on some announcements, and then trying to determine too all the logistics that fall from those announcements, documentation, outreach, staffing impacts, those kinds of things are all related. But again, just echoing, we want kids in school. And so if there's an opportunity to help that happen through vaccination, number one, and masking, number two, then we're supporters of that, because ultimately we can deliver better for students when we have them with us.
Let me change gears here a little bit from vaccinations to this. Your child's in school, the one time they're going to have that mask off is when they eat, whether it's outside or the cafeteria. And Superintendent Merlino, what is your district doing specifically for that time where exposure could be at the most risk? When the kids are eating, is there going to be separation? Have you set some rules for eating when it comes to kids in school?
Yeah, I guess the first thing I would say is in Washington, our kids will be allowed to take their masks off at recess as well. So it's not just lunch as the time that they will be unmasked. They have the opportunity on breaks outside or on recess to be able to make that happen. So that's a positive thing, and that's a change from last year. Lunch, lunch is a challenge. I think one of the things that has been, I think, really beneficial over the course of the last year is the way that, at least in Clark County, we've really collaborated well as a superintendent groups and districts, and we've had opportunities to talk on a weekly basis with our county health director, Dr. Melnick. And this is something we talked a lot about last Monday, was the distancing. Now in Washington, the guidelines specifically speak to that physical distancing should not get in the way of stopping school from happening in person. So it can't be a barrier to having in-person school. So what we do have is when masked, you've got 3 feet, and in classrooms, and the recommendation is 6 feet when unmasked, but it's a recommendation. So what we've asked our schools to do is to do this to the greatest extent possible. There's significant impacts when you have a full school and you're looking at how do you actually staff lunchrooms, and do you put students in gyms? Do you put students outside? Do you put students in hallways to eat? And then there's supervision issues with that. So we are working with our principals at least as much as possible in the fall. As long as the weather holds up, we'll be outside and eating outside as much as we possibly can. And then as the weather turns, we will continue with following the guidelines, looking at distancing as much as possible. They likely will have more lunch periods than what we typically would have to provide for more distancing and more spacing. But this is a challenge that all of us will be working with, but not to the point that it's such a great challenge that we can't move forward with bringing our kids back full time.
Yeah, it sounds like you'll be flexible on how things move forward, and you'll be listening to, of course, your principals. Superintendent Guerrero, similar question for you. How will you prevent COVID from spreading during breakfast and lunchtime with all the students, of course, with their masks off and eating?
Well, we all went to school, so we know that the time of the day when you're around the greatest number of kids is when you're in the cafeteria, whether it's breakfast or lunch. And of course, we want to make sure our students have their nutrition needs met. So it's a challenge because the plans that we'll have to institute are really site specific. So working with our school principals, in some cases, that might be an easier task. Perhaps the enrollment is lower, but in some of our bigger schools or campuses that have smaller cafeterias, we're going to have to get creative. That means more rotations of kids coming through the cafeteria in smaller groups, adding more meal times, expanding the lunch schedule, where we are able to have opportunities, weather permitting, to enjoy your meal outdoors. And so we are exploring sort of all of those strategies. And to Superintendent Merlino's point, wherever possible, we want to maintain that 3 foot nose to nose distance, because we know the mask is going to be off or you can't eat, obviously.
Okay, what about school buses? We talk about this, we've covered when kids are eating. And let's start with you, Superintendent Perry. You have a lot of school buses in the Salem-Keizer district. What are the protocols on buses now for keeping kids safe? It's kind of hard to distance on a school bus.
So protocols are similar to last year. The one constant is masking. And then and in fact, that's a federal guideline and regulation. So I think as long as we're masked on airplanes, we'll be masked on school buses. And so, but the other thing we have is, extra hand washing, extra cleaning, and we do have the ability for good ventilation. So I think our school buses will be okay. And we also don't have long lengths of time. And the key is the hand washing, the face coverings, and some additional ventilation as needed.
And Superintendent Snell, what's the situation for your school district in terms of keeping kids safe on buses?
Similar. I think something that that also just parents should feel some confidence in is, as we're talking, all of us have very similar strategies based on what we're learning and what we're applying. So the only thing I would add to what Superintendent Perry said is just the availability of masks as kids are coming on. Sometimes they'll show up at the bus stop and they may not have those. So we want to have them available to them and make sure that they're comfortable getting on the bus and really trying to be proactive about our communication too. You had mentioned earlier about enforcing masking. We want everybody to understand before they arrive at the bus stop the expectations for getting on the school bus. And so that we can get kids on the bus safely, get them to school quickly as well.
Okay, when we come back, will we see a hybrid model this school year, and how will quarantine work?
Also ahead, could we end up in distance learning once again? We'll get the answer to those questions right after this break. Welcome back to Kids, Class, and Coronavirus, a KOIN6 town hall. And tonight, joining us, 5 local school superintendents. They're answering questions that you submitted about the return to school.
Now, districts across Oregon and Washington are committed to returning to full-time in-person learning. But you all have students who cannot safely return to school, and you will have possibly some positive cases, which brings us to our next question. And this is submitted by a student. And the question is, what is the plan if a child tests positive? What will that child have in lieu of in-person instruction for 2 weeks? Will the whole class quarantine and transition to online learning for 2 weeks if there are multiple cases? And I think I'll ask that to Superintendent Guerrero with Portland Public Schools.
Thank you, Mr. Gianola, for sending the easy questions my way. Well, what I would say is, of course, we're going to be very careful about making sure we're following the proper protocols as laid out by our public health agencies, making sure symptomatic testing is readily available, that we're cooperating on the contact tracing, and we're making sure to do everything we can to keep everybody safe. If we find that there are in fact cases, if that's an isolated case, then that student will be staying home and quarantining. If it appears to be multiple cases, then you'll have that larger group of students that will want to make sure and maintain a continuity of learning. The good thing is our educators and our students have grown quite accustomed to understanding what distance learning or remote learning looks like. We're hoping we don't end up in a situation where that's a large scale problem, but we have continued to build up our digital platforms, learning platforms, to make sure the instructional resources, the digital resources are there posted, or that we have some lesson plans that are on deck, that we can support our schools and our teachers with, making sure that if a student has to be home, that the learning is able to continue.
All right, and then I want to go to Dr. Ricky Smith of Tigard-Tualatin Schools. Not only do we want to know the answer to that question about if a child tests positive, I want to add too, what if a teacher tests positive, and your thoughts on how that would work?
Thank you so much. I think the first question, let's address the students. What we now know, and this is based on the CDC and Oregon Health Authority has affirmed this, if the student who tests positive was wearing a mask and the other students within 3 feet proximity to that student were also wearing a mask, only the student who is positive and showing symptoms needs to be quarantined. So that's the good news. But then it becomes a matter of then alerting families to be watching, just to be on the safe side. But the CDC believes that there is good evidence now that if everyone is masked, that only the child that is symptomatic needs to be quarantined. In our district, our tentative plan at this point, and we're testing the system out, is to roll them for the 2 weeks into our virtual academy, which is going to follow exactly the same schedules, bell schedules as elementary, middle, and secondary, and try to pace at the same pace virtually, so that the student has minimal gaps in learning as well as other supports. But I think the most important piece here is that parents do that self-check with the child before they go out the door in the morning. Is there any fever? It doesn't matter. It can be a million of other things, but if the child has a fever, don't send them. If the child has a headache or sniffles, and especially a fever, don't send them. Keep them at home, alert us, and we will assist you in terms of rolling them forward. Better that than to have them come to school and then we have to go into tracing mode. But I think we are in a much better place for that. And then certainly we're also offering a K-12 online, fully mirroring brick and mortar academy. That parents can have a 1 semester option if they wish to do that in the event that we finally get to a pediatric vaccination for children below age 12. And then they can roll back into brick and mortar, or they may just wish to stay there for the entire year and experience that, and then still have access to all the other extracurricular and sports activities after school.
Let's get to Superintendent Merlino. Mike, what if a child tests positive here as we open up the classrooms again? What about quarantining? I know you've looked at some of those scenarios.
I think it's similar to what you've heard my colleagues mention earlier. If that occurs, we work directly with Clark County Public Health to determine the exposure within the classroom or wherever this individual was in the school. And honestly, we've worked very cooperatively with the Department of Health, the public Clark County Health Department, on identifying any potential exposures. And we were fortunate last year, and I think most of our schools, I think, had really good results from the protocols that we had in place, and not having any real breakthroughs or outbreaks within our schools. Now, all that being said, it's not to say that it couldn't happen. So in our case, it's very similar to what you've heard. It's kind of an individual situation. It would depend on whether it was one student, whether it was a group of students. You could have a classroom. We do have options of working with our students, as you would any student that might be sick, from home for a few days, to flipping back to remote as we did this last spring. And honestly, for the last year, we've been doing that. So it definitely depends on the situation. We're anticipating that it could happen. We're very hopeful. With the experience we had last year, it won't, and agree with Dr. Ricky Smith that the first thing is for parents to really screen their students at home. And if there are any kinds of issues, making sure that they remain at home. And then really the same goes for staff. If staff aren't feeling well, they shouldn't be coming to school either, and taking the chance that they may spread. And the protocols for them staying at home if they're exposed really aren't any different than they are for our kids. So we just work with our health providers, and we're hopeful that we have real good results again this year as we did last year.
All right, I want to bring in a new question here, and this comes from a parent, and I'd like the first person to answer this to be Superintendent Perry of Salem-Keizer Schools. This parent asking, why is there not a universal comprehensive distance learning option for the fall, at least until all K-5 students have the chance to be vaccinated?
I would say that our North Star is to get kids back into school in person. We know the value of the social emotional health of in-person learning. We also know that we can, if we're going to accelerate learning and catch up, that we need to, a lot of that happens in person. In Salem-Keizer, just like in, I think, probably all of our school districts, we do have an online option or an online academy for parents that want to keep kids in an online environment this year. So our goal is, and we've said, the most important thing we can do is get our kids back to school. We've proven we can do it safely. We have multiple layers of mitigation strategies. We're all talking again about the same types of safety protocols because we know what works. The one thing I'll say that we haven't emphasized enough is that protocol around washing hands. We'll continue to teach that, insist on it, have lots of time, even in the lunchroom, that in and out washing of hands helps for that lunchtime as well. So we've done this. We've had thousands of kids in our summer schools without outbreaks. So I would say let's get our kids back. They need to be in person.
Okay, I think that's the goal of all the superintendents and a lot of parents and kids. They want to go back to in-person learning. But we did get this question, Superintendent Guerrero, why there wasn't a hybrid option offered this year. You're saying you may have to use hybrid depending if a kid tests positive. Is that what you're saying? It may be used on a limited basis?
Well, obviously, we'll need to be ready if we see an outbreak. But what we've seen happen here, it's very validating to hear my colleagues. As educators, we're always paying attention and learning lessons from our experience. And we know that when we implement effectively all of our layered health and safety measures, the training and education that's fact-based, the hand washing, the regular cleaning, disinfecting, the isolation, the quarantining, the symptomatic testing, the airflow and ventilation, physical distancing, masks, and vaccinations, the combination of those things have kept our infection rates really low. So like my colleagues, Portland Public Schools is offering a full-time virtual online academy option. And we have just over 500 families who have made that choice. We made an initial run and there were a few more families waitlisted. We've added some staffing, and I think everybody who expressed an interest has been led into participating in that way. I think if there's a theme from the last 18 months is that as school systems, we are challenged with having to adapt to continually different circumstances. It's hard for me to say because I don't have a crystal ball to tell our broader public that we're going to go into hybrid if X, Y, and Z because I'm not sure what the circumstances will be because we're taking in the information and the evidence of what we're observing as we go.
Yeah, you mentioned a key word there, adapt. I feel like pivot is another one, key words of this pandemic. So let's move on to another question coming from a parent. And this, we'll start with you, Dr. Snell. This parent asking, in the event that case numbers of COVID-19 Delta variant continue to rise, is your district prepared to go back to online only education? Meaning, of course, going back to how things were before. Have you thought about that scenario?
Yeah, unfortunately, like we've had to plan for everything. And so I think that's a worst case scenario and it's a scenario that would be dictated really by public health because we in K-12 are not going to just move to remote learning without being directed by public health. And that could be district-wide. Probably it's more likely in some of the scenarios that you described earlier of a classroom or a grade level or a school or something where an outbreak has happened. And that's happened before with measles and other situations prior to the pandemic. It probably didn't get quite the media attention as this is, and rightfully so. But we're ready to do that. Our staff, learned a tremendous amount last year. So we have way more tools in our toolbox to respond to students' needs. So I think we all have learned that whatever our plan is on Monday, that we also better have a different plan for Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday. Our staff have learned a lot of flexibility too, but I think an overall goal is to try to create as much consistency for our students and their families. Also our working conditions, right? We know that we're going to perform at our best when people know what to expect. So plan for the worst, but really, follow these mitigation layered strategies. And we think that we can keep students in school.
Dr. Ricky Smith, you heard what all our superintendents said. I'm sure you're going to agree with them. You want those kids back in the classroom. That's the priority. But you are willing to adapt when circumstances arise that you may have to go back to online learning?
Jeff, the real issue here is, can we differentiate? So to Dr. Snell's point, if a particular school is having an outbreak, that may be the one that we shift into the online academy for a period of time. And if the others are running without challenges, I would advocate certainly to OHA and to the governor's office that you allow us to continue, because we know that in person is the gold standard. And I think the more that we can be flexible and adjust, because until we get to a level where we are not getting hit time and again by another variant that behaves potentially even more aggressively, that we've learned a great deal. I have a saying, let's not waste a good pandemic in terms of all the learning that we've done. And let's take all of those various strategies and have them at the ready, as Dr. Snell identified, but let's be thoughtful and differentiate. Let's not do a one size all if we don't have to, so that we are being really thoughtful and strategic about that. Certainly in a meeting that myself and Superintendent Perry and Superintendent Guerrero were in with the governor this week, she did not indicate that that was on the table. And I think it would have to be something really draconian to shut us all down and move us back into that. And so certainly from my perspective, and I'm guessing my colleagues would join me in this, we would advocate for, let's take it on a school by school basis. And again, because the mitigation is so strong and our experience last year was so tight that we were able to, quickly identify and quarantine. I do not see, even with as aggressive as the Delta variant is, I don't see the need to contemplate that at this point.
Dr. Ricky Smith, thank you. It sounds like, plan to have plans that can change. We're going to take a quick break, and still to come, how will students recover from a year of distance learning? How will schools be able to get them back on track? And
what have we learned from the pandemic that will improve the future of education? Those answers when we come back. Welcome back to Kids, Class, and Coronavirus. The first day of school just a few weeks away, and we still have lots of questions for our superintendents who are joining us tonight.
Think about this. Most students have not been in a classroom full-time ever since March of last year, almost a year and a half. Now, as we head into this new school year, we're also hearing about what's called unfinished learning. Students are behind on where they should be. So I want to start with Superintendent Guerrero with Portland Public Schools. How will your district assess where students are and catch them up to make sure that they don't fall behind further?
Well, that's absolutely the key question. Our entire core mission is to make sure that our students are getting the education that we have a responsibility for providing. So there's been a continuity of learning during this pandemic, but we know it hasn't been a substitute for full-time in-person learning between our teachers, their support staff, and our students, and engaging in that grade level content that we expect that they'll have opportunity to access and gain proficiency in. So how do we assess where our kids are at when they come back? Well, now more than ever, the importance of assessments, engaging what students were able to be exposed to, and what gaps or growth areas that we need to prioritize and pay attention to. And that's going to lead to a lot of really important conversations, reflections our teachers will need to make about the students in front of them, teams of teachers and our school instructional teams to really have a plan for how we accelerate the learning where there was in fact some unfinished learning. The other thing we need to do is expand instructional time. So what are all the myriad of ways that we can create extended learning opportunities? Is that at home? Is that on a digital platform? Is it working with our after school providers, or adding additional partners who can reinforce some of the learning that we hope our students have? And one thing you notice in the Portland Public Schools, as well as with many of my colleagues, is we ran full summer school programs to try to create additional instructional time and additional days to try to get caught up. And I think in public education, you'll probably continue to see an extended fifth quarter or summer learning being made available for our students because they really do need that time.
Superintendent Perry, the same question, and I think Superintendent Guerrero said it. This is the number one question, I think, tonight. Parents so afraid that their child has fallen behind, and it's going to become apparent once they begin in-class learning again.
Yeah, so I'll echo what Superintendent Guerrero said, but I just want to have us pause for a minute and say that our kids have learned a lot, and they might not have learned the things we expected them to learn during the year. So I think our kids are coming to us with a different skill set, and that has to be job one, to really recognize what strengths they're bringing to this. And the other thing I'd like us to really think deeply about is our kids, their social emotional health has suffered. And if we don't take care of that and get them back in school and engaged, strong relationships with the teachers and the staff in the school, the learning doesn't happen. So for our parents, think about learning over time, that we can't make it all up in 6 weeks. We can't make it up in 9 weeks, but over a year, we'll get there. I think the thing our teachers got really good at, especially in hybrid, their learning time was so short with kids that are in person, that they got really good at intense targeted learning to really accelerate learning. And so I know that's a lesson from the pandemic that our teachers will take into classrooms as they assess where they are. But job number one, get them in, build relationships, capitalize on the strengths that they have learned in the pandemic, because that's what will accelerate learning. And then the rest of the learning happens. So I would say let's get our kids back in school and get started and take care of them and care for their well-being, and then get on to accelerating their academic learning.
Our next question comes from the mother of a second grader. Let's watch and listen.
Are there opportunities for more hybrid learning regardless of COVID status?
We might have answered this already, Dr. Snell, but is there going to be any opportunities for hybrid learning regardless of COVID status?
I think it's a great question. We've learned a lot through the pandemic about the way we deliver instruction, and time and space has always been such a constant variable for us in schools. We get, in Washington State, we get 180 school days, 6.5 hours a day. It's really hard to sometimes differentiate for students in that model. And now, after experiencing hybrid, like there's some opportunity here as we move forward. When you think about a typical high schooler's day, if you ever talk to a high schooler about, what did you learn today or how did it go, their typical answer is fine, if at best, right? And to think that they're just going to sit through 6 periods all the time now, that they've experienced some flexibility in their learning, I think we have to be ready to adapt to that. So I think that you're going to see, in particular at the secondary level, as we come out of this pandemic, we kind of collect ourselves. We're going to see different kinds of opportunities for our secondary students. And I believe that you will see combinations of hybrid and in-person, where students are maybe taking their classes in a certain way via online instruction, and then they're meeting in small groups. They're maybe having internships and work experiences. So I think it's as hard as it's been in public education in all sectors. So I don't want to minimize everyone's heavy lift over the last 2 years. There is such tremendous hope and opportunity for our future if we can just get kids back in school and start to establish some regularity of programming and experiences for our families, students, and staff.
Yeah, and let's ask a similar question to Dr. Riki Smith. Not only this question from this mom of the second grader about will there be chances for hybrid learning regardless of COVID status, but also I think you think about kids perhaps who are in a situation where their parents might work a lot, their situation's different, they're not in as stable of a home. Can you also consider that when answering this question too, if it's more or less beneficial for that student?
I think it also, one of the things that I would want to assess is what are the particular needs of the child. And I certainly echo the comments of my colleagues here on this point. I think what the pandemic has allowed us to see is that there are a variety of ways to deliver instruction. Again, I want to anchor into nothing takes the place of face-to-face with that teacher who can look over that child's shoulder, who can assess what's really happening in real time, to have that personal, side eye that basically says, I need you back on task, as well as that was awesome, way to go. And so I think it just depends on the individual child. And that is something that all of us are well versed in, particularly for students with intellectual and behavioral disabilities. But I think it goes beyond that. And I know one of the things that we are going to have to pay attention to is the fact that the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Civil Rights, has already issued a Dear Colleague letter saying, pay attention to students who may be coming back to you with long COVID. And may need even more specialized instruction and tailored instruction. So hybrid is certainly could be very easily part of that. I think it is more easily facilitated at the middle and secondary levels where you have discrete teachers by course. But it is something certainly that we could easily explore relative to elementary as well, based on a child's need.
We only have 5 minutes left, so keep your answers. I want to get to each of you before we wrap up here to about 30 seconds. And here's the final question. What are some of the takeaways from this past year and a half that you think will change education forever? So a short answer to that, which probably really needs a long answer, but let's start with you, Superintendent Guerrero.
We know the public education school system hadn't changed much in a couple hundred years. And if the pandemic's accomplished anything, it's that we've had to take a really critical look at how we deliver learning. And so we learned a few lessons, how to leverage technology tools. We've learned that we need our community partners to help us wrap around and meet the needs of our students. We've learned from our students that one of the critical aspects of the school community is making sure they're in relationship with the adults and their peers, that they have a sense of belonging. We've learned that public education should be considered a part of that American infrastructure, and the infusion of resources that allow us to take care of the social, emotional, and behavioral needs, never mind academic needs of our students. We're braiding those resources. They're helping to make a difference. I hope that we've learned that level of resources being made available to our students are going to continue to be critically important. Those are a few of the lessons we've learned from this experience.
Superintendent Perry?
So everything Superintendent Guerrero said, and just the way we show up for our families. And I think it's changed us in ways we don't even know about yet. So it's changed us as educators. The fact that we were in our students' homes every day, we had interactions with families, we learned about what was going well, we learned about their sisters and brothers, we learned about the animals they had in their home, we learned about the challenges, and we learned about culture and tradition and that culturally responsiveness that we just got because of having to be in that virtual learning space. And so I think we will show up in homes of families for now and in the future. How do we do parent-teacher conferences? Do parents have to come into our schools? Can they see us when we call home instead of calling home on the phone? So some of that, I think there's been some more personal interaction that we've gotten that should last well beyond the pandemic.
Superintendent Merlino.
I would say quickly, I think that we're going to see more individualized work with kids. The flexibility, the technology gave us a lot more flexibility to tailor programs to meet kids' needs, as opposed to, as Dr. Snell mentioned earlier, meeting the schedule or meeting the minutes. There's going to be legislative changes. I think we've already seen some rule changes on the way we can provide support for kids. I think over time, there's going to be a realization that the takeaways from this was that a lot of kids maybe did benefit from a different type of a schedule. I agree completely with Superintendent Perry on communicating with parents. I know as a parent myself, it's much easier to go to a conference by Zooming in or an IEP meeting. I think we got better participation and connection with our parents through technology. And I think that will continue.
And your thoughts, Dr. Snell?
I just echo, I'm inspired listening to my colleagues talk about the opportunities ahead. I think time and space is a huge thing that are now variables that we can manipulate a little better than we could previously. And then I just, I think we've all had an experience of doing something again that we took for granted. whether it's going out to a meal or hugging a relative, or, those, like, I really appreciate things a little more than I did before. And I can tell you, we so value our time with students. We thought we did before, but now when they come into our space, it's like this joy that we as educators are just that's what moves us and allows us to really do our best for students and families. So I hope we don't lose that. I hope that we get so normal again that maybe we do start to forget it, but then how do we find ways to remind ourselves how precious the moments of life are and how we can celebrate those together and rally around our most precious thing that we have, our children. And right now, like, it's interesting to see because it doesn't really feel sometimes like in our communities we are rallying around our children. And so we have an opportunity as adults to step into that space, set aside some of our differences and concentrate on these amazing young people who are ready to make this world an even better place than it is today.
And Superintendent Ricky Smith, your thoughts on that?
So building upon all of what my colleagues have said, I would say ditto. I think if I were to sum it up briefly, it would be, we have learned the importance of personalized instruction. We have learned the importance of personalizing our interactions with families, and that one size does not need to fit all, and that we can adapt and change and increase the amount of interaction that we have. We have learned the need for personalizing supports to families, and that some need far more basic needs than we anticipated support, and we are now providing that. And I would end with the fact that we cannot wait. I am genuinely excited to see our children this fall. And the one thing that you learn when you cannot do it is how much you love what you do. There isn't a colleague on this call, nor the colleagues that we represent, that don't love our children. I mean that deeply, and care for them deeply, and just are so excited about the opportunity for them to come back in if they can, or come into our online instruction, because we are the experts. We know how to do this work. Your children will have, it may be some challenges with masks, but I can promise you, they will have an amazing year, regardless of which of the districts they enter this fall that are represented here, and all the rest of them across the state of Washington and the state of Oregon. So I want to say thank you to COIN for giving us this opportunity this evening to share a little bit about where we are and who we are and what we believe and where we're going.
Superintendent, thank you. We want to thank all our superintendents for joining us tonight. Elizabeth, we started this hour by talking about kindness. Think of the pressure you parents are under, our kids are under, our superintendents are under, and our teachers are under. Let's approach the start of this new school year with kindness.
Yeah, and of course, we're going to work towards stability, but also, of course, we have to adapt. So many things we'll look forward to in this new school year. By the way, if you missed any of tonight's town hall, you can catch up on that and much more at coin.com. Again, we thank you, everyone, for your time. Have a good night.